Good morning. I'm going to try and do that same thing I did last time. Pay attention to what's going on. I just don't know if I can do it because I don't really know what I'm doing. I don't know how I did it last time. I can't remember how I did it. Technology and me are not the biggest of friends. In fact, I don't think my iPad's working, so that's going to suck a little bit for me. Okay. Still don't connect the internet. I don't even know how to make this work. I give up. Alright, welcome to the third live stream that we have done here on YouTube. Today's topic is filtration. Excuse me while I grab my coffee. So I thought that a good way to start the live streams would be telling a joke, and purely because I have teenage children and I find it hilarious telling them dad jokes, which they hate. So today my joke is this. How many bones is in a human hand? A handful! One of my favourite dad jokes of all times. Alright, let's get on to it. So, filtration. Today we're going to talk about filtration and basically the styles of filtrations that I've played around with. So there's a few. We've got foam filters, hang-on back filters, canister filters, internal filters, sump filters, and natural filtration. So let's start with foam filters, basically. So they're the air-driven. Normally they are very cheap and effective. They do have the limitations. I have had some really big ones filtering sort of 500-600 litre tanks, but the mechanical side of it is poor. They just don't have any mechanical ability to it, basically, so you've got to be sort of siphoning out quite a bit anyway. But the biological on them are phenomenally good. There's so many different sort of porous areas inside a little foam filter, they go really well. 60 litres, that kind of thing. And foam filters are phenomenal. They're cheap, they're only about $5-10 a pop. Most people got an air filter hanging around and some airline, and I think they're very efficient. Both the tanks behind me, they've both got foam filters or corner filters running in them. I've had no issues with them whatsoever. I think they're really bang for buck. If you're setting up fish rooms, they're fantastic for that. I ran my shop on sponge filters when we had it, so I had a big air compressor outside. In fact, I've even run this room when I had about 60 odd tanks in here with them. Big air compressor outside running on a bit of PVC pipe. So that was the air bank. Basically, it was blocked off at one end, so the air just sort of up into it. And then drilled holes, had your little steel, stainless steel nozzle piece attached into it, drop line going down into an air line, and then straight into the filter. It was absolutely phenomenal. They worked really, really well. So I think for bigger projects like fish rooms, setting up fish shops, and breeding setups like that, I think they're really, really good, really, really efficient and effective. So that would be my recommendation if you're doing things like that. Another sort of filtration system would be the hang-on back filter. Funny story, when I first got into fish, the first filter that I got was a hang-on back, and I absolutely hated it. Subsequently I threw it out, and in my mind hang-on back filters suck. Recently I've started using them, and I actually quite like them. They've got the limitations, but they're not terrible. I've got a hang-on back running my 60 litre Blackwater aquarium, and it's doing really, really well. I didn't want anything hanging out. You can modify them quite nicely as well, so I've taken all the original cartridges out of mine and just put a bit of filter floss at the front of it and a few bio noodles inside of it, and that's pretty much it. And it works really, really well for me. This is just a small one. It's only about sort of that big, so it's not a very big one, and it's still doing what I need it to do. Far larger ones. I've actually got some hang-on backs coming in to stock really soon. I've got a few coming in, and I'm going to take one out and do a bit of a trial with one and a bit of a review on, because like I said, I never really liked them. I had a really big one on a turtle tank, and I found that it blocked quite quickly, but I think it was because I was filming a couple of turtles. If I had been smart about it, and well, actually it's not the filter that's blocking, it's the fact that I've got a couple of big messy turtles, that might have changed things up a little bit. So they do the limits. They are relatively expensive, I find, for what they are. I think that's probably another reason why I've gone, well, maybe I could go up to a canister. Definitely New Zealand, they're not the cheapest of filters, and that might be because they don't sell all that many. They're not the kind of the popular filtration system, so that might be why they cost a little bit more. Um, I do like the way that all you've got going is a pipe going in, and there's no power cords going in and that kind of stuff. Being out of the tank, I've taken the lid off my one and I've put a bit of pothos in it. So again, that's drawing a bit of nitrates. Which again, it's just something you kind of can't do with an internal. You can't do with a sponge. So it's definitely got some advantages on that. So that would be kind of where I sit with the hang-on backs. Smart enough the way you set your aquarium up. They have it behind it so you can't see it, or on the side. You can even have it at the front if you want to play with it at the front. If you have it at the front, you'll be able to easy use. See how I feel about them even further. Next filtration system is the internal filter, and I've got one right here on the shelf. So, as the words you'd think, they're internal, so they go inside your tank. I have always really enjoyed internal filters. I think, generally speaking, they're really good value for money. I think they produce a really good quantity of flow coming through your fish tank. Most of them provide a spray bar like that. If you don't want as much flow, you can drill bigger holes in it, and it continues the turnover amount, but it just drops the pressure of the flow going through. So there's a little tip if you want to cut down a bit of the water flow with an internal filter. Generally speaking, they come with a sponge and some carbon. I normally always throw the carbon out straight away and go with a sponge and try and chuck a couple of noodles in there. I mean, if you look at it sort of that way, it's kind of like a hang-on back, similar sort of principle, except inside. So internal filters, I have used a lot of them. I think they're not all made the same. There are some really good manufacturers of internal filters and some really poor manufacturers of internal filters. But I guess you can kind of say that with all filtration systems. I quite like the Helier ones. I think they're pretty good. And believe it or not, the tank-made ones I think are really well constructed as well. Absolutely get what you pay for with internal filters, and that's to be said with pretty much all filters. Generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, the more you pay, the lower the power consumption, and that's something I think you need to really look at when selecting a canister filter. Selecting a filter full stop, including canisters. I know that, like I said, I like the tank-made ones. I think they're really well constructed, and I think they do a really good job, but I think they're a little bit more expensive to run compared to some of the other ones. So you're paying a little bit less, but you're going to pay more in the long run for what you're doing. So that's definitely a payoff when it comes to them. They're really easy to clean. You snap a couple of bits off, you can get to your impeller, you can clean it out just like that. I think they're far easier to use than a canister filter. They have you far more mechanical filtration than a sponge filter, and I think they improve the flow more than most hang-on backs. Not all, but most, I think. The downside is that you've got to put your hands in the tank to clean them out. You could get stray power going through into your tank as well, so there's a few downers on them. Overall, I really like internal filters. I don't think I'd push one over the sort of 200 litre mark. I think even a bigger one wouldn't feel quite right. I think I'd want to go slightly bigger than that. But yeah, internal filters are good for plenty of applications. They do, of course, if you're going to set up a bank of tanks and use internal filters, every single one of them has a plug. You can't see the plug. Every single one of them has a plug, so you've got to take them into account if you need to plug them into stuff. If you're running a bank of 10 tanks, you need 10 plugs for it. So for that situation, maybe not the best. Maybe something like a sump or a foam filter, but for just running a tank or two, I think that they're pretty good. That's pretty much my rundown of the internal filter, so let's put this one back up. So next we've got the canister filter. By and large, probably the filter system that I have used the most. Tanks around the 200 to 250 litre mark. I really enjoy using the Aqua One CF1200. As far as value for money goes, I think those filters are fantastic. The advantages of canister filter is you've got such a big, basically canister, funnily enough, to put all your media and stuff like that in it. Generally, they come with plastic balls, a bit of foam, and some bio noodles. I generally speaking get rid of the balls and run foam and the bio noodles, and I really stock up on the bio noodles so you can kind of increase your biological load within your aquarium. Again, not all canister filters are made the same. There are some far better than others, and depending on what sort of size you go, sometimes some brands surpass other brands. As an example, the Aqua make the CF2400, which isn't a bad filter, but if I was to compare that to the same sort of sizing on the FX5 or FX6 or what have you, the FX6 blows it out of the water, even though it's significantly more expensive. As it gets into the bigger range, I think that Fluval filter just absolutely kicks butt compared to the Aqua One, whereas you go into a slightly smaller sized one, and I think the Aqua One range is better. Obviously, there's a lot of different brands of canister filters. Just a couple of examples that I had there. So, some of the disadvantages of the canister filter is if you don't maintain them properly, your seals around the edges can get a little bit brittle, and if you happen to have a power cut, water can siphon back out into your canister filter and pour water everywhere. This has happened to me one night. We had a power cut and one of my canister filters wasn't maintained properly, and I had a few hundred litres of water on the ground in the morning, which was not pleasant by any stretch of the imagination, as I'm sure you can imagine. So there's definitely a downside. You are taking your fish tank and putting it into a different position. It's got another point where things can go wrong outside of the tank. So it's definitely something to consider when looking into a canister filter. But I personally think that the cons, so the pros outweigh the cons, being that I think you get a far bigger base for filtration. I think that you get a lot more options with turnover. Some of them have got variable speeds. You can sort of turn the taps up and down, which I think are a bonus as well. I like canisters. I've used canisters for a long time. I wouldn't say they're my go-to filtration, but they are definitely up there. Much like the internal filter, if you're running several tanks and you have several canisters, you've got to have plugs for every single one of them, or lots of multi-boxes hanging around, so there is definitely a limitation there. Depending on the filter, cleaning them can be a bit of a pain. Not so much cleaning them, but then putting them back together. Sometimes you've got to do a bit of witch magic and sucking on some hoses and maybe some jug filling and some pouring and stuff like that, so they can be a little bit of a pain. Others are fantastic. Plug them in and away they go. So there's definitely some sort of limitations when it comes to that side of it. You can often leave canister filters for a lot longer than other filters because the general mass of the size of them means they can last a lot longer. So there's a positive over that one. But in saying that, the longer you sort of leave it, it sort of becomes a bit of a nitrate factory, and you might be wondering, you're doing water change all the time, but your nitrates are building up, and it's because you've got a big canister full of sludgy stuff, and it's not quite being that efficient. Clean out your canister filter, and away you go. For anybody who is on the chat, I can't see it because what if I push this button? No, I can't see it. When I push this button. No. There might not be any chat anyway. But if there is, I can't see it because I don't really know what I'm doing. So we're up to canister filters. Yeah, again, power consumption, they generally speaking, they consume a lot more, but they're designed to work a lot more. Here in New Zealand, we're fairly limited to the canister brands we've got. Aqua One, Sun, Fluval, Eheim. Generally speaking, that's about it. Yeah, it's about it off the top of my head. I might be wrong. So we're very limited to the amount that we can get. We're very limited to the amount of functions and things like that. UV sterilizers and inline heaters and things like that aren't all that common. So they're generally just a filtration unit for the ones that we get here in New Zealand. and then they can be very, very expensive. FX6, for example, retails $1,500-$1,600 or something like that. That's what the recommended retail price is for them here in New Zealand. So they're very expensive, some of them, and we're kind of limited to what is available. Right, so next thing I would touch on would be sump filters. I think if we're pushing tanks over the 500-ish litre mark, I think sump filters are probably where you want to go. I know that it gives more scope of things that can go wrong and places that water can leak out of your aquarium, but I think the fact that you increase your water volume quite dramatically is a bonus. The more water you got, generally speaking, the easier it is to look after, give or take. But also you can, if you're setting it up yourself, you can really design what you want in it. If you're having royal plecos, for example, which are known to be very, very messy fish, you could set up a couple of staged mechanical filtrations, like filter sock at one end and then maybe running through some sort of a filter floss and then through your foam to really try and catch as much of those particles as possible to keep your water clear. If you are deciding to run a very heavy Tropheus tank, for example, you could really, really ramp up your biological filtration because you've got so much extra room inside a sump. You go, sweet, I'm going to be pushing the limits with the amount of fish that I've got inside this tank. I'm going to put in some extra biological filtration to work with that, some extra noodles or something along those lines to really kind of help that become a healthy ecosystem. You have the controllability of picking what pump you want to be using, whether you want to be using a DC pump which you can control, or like I'm using a straight Laguna pond pump. You've got all the options available to you, and you can decide, well, these fish want high flow, these fish want low flow, I'm going to keep these fish so I can have my flow a little bit lower. If you've got a variable pump, you can turn it up and down, that type of stuff. So there's a lot of controllability when you go down the sump route, which I think is fantastic. I also like the fact that all your equipment is completely out of your aquarium and all you're looking at in your display tank is literally your aquarium. So I think that is a big up to the sump filtration system. I can hear my baby crying. And that's why I like sumps. Most people have got a fish tank hanging around in the backyard that you can convert into a sump. Glass partition to a chamber and you're away, basically. They're really, really easy to design and set up, or you can go really, really elaborate and just rock the socks off everybody in the world and then go ooh and get some super sump envy. I think if you go back to one of my original videos, we did a tour of an Asian arowana display tank. The sump on that was absolutely amazing and I was just rolling the entire time. Phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal, that sump. And you can do that if that's what you want to do with your sump. Behind the cabinet, open it up and away you go. I've been to a couple of people's places and their sumps are spotless and they're just sparkling. Like, ooh, wow, it's just, there's a lot you can do with it. It's essentially another body of water connected, so you've got your advantages on that. Some of the disadvantages is that you could end up paying a little bit more because you can customize it to what you want. Although if you're buying a sump and you're getting the bigger tanks compared to maybe canister filters, you may not be spending more money than what you would on a canister filter. Other disadvantages is that obviously it's something else that can go wrong. You've got another tank which could pop or have a leak or what have you, some more water going out. If your tank is not, your sump's not quite designed properly, you could have overflow issues. If you don't quite set up where your water levels are going to be and you have a power cut, water can go down and overflow outside of your sump. Or alternatively, if you don't have an automatic top-off system and you go a long time between water changes, you can have that water kind of evaporating and getting sort of below your heater and stuff like that. So there's a few options there. I can't quite remember what happened, but I remember that happened to me. I can't remember what caused it, but the sump water was quite low, and then I went to put my hand in, and the water had been so low that the heater had been kind of like this through the water level, and it had split. So the heater was still on, and because it had cracked completely clean open because it was cold air and then warm water, I put my hand in it and gave myself one heck of an electric shock. It threw me across the room, and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And I happened to put my hand in it again before I realised. Then eventually when I realised, I thought it was quite amusing, and I tried to get my flatmate to give it a go because it was quite a rush. He laughed at me and said no, and then in hindsight I realised exactly what I was doing, and the things you do when you're young and dumb. But yeah, so there's something else to consider. There might be a few little stray electrical things go wrong on that. It's very, very uncommon, but it's still something that could happen, and it can obviously happen inside your aquarium as well, but that's something else that could potentially go wrong. So the last sort of filtration setup I want to talk about is the natural filtration setup. So that is basically when you are just building an ecosystem and building a natural aquarium, and you're letting things like plants and stuff like that filter the water. So I had a 4 foot, excuse me, 4 foot, 200 litre aquarium in my fish room for a couple of years. I had a carpet of dwarf Sagittaria and Cryptophanes, had a little bit of algae, and I had a group of, I think it was 8 Colombian tetras, and they spawned in that tank all the time. Maybe did water changes on every 8-9 months, something like that. The nitrate level on that tank hardly ever got up over 20 because of the amount of plants that were in there. There was no filter in it whatsoever. The light was on a timer, and I did have an air stone in there, and that was pretty much it. I topped it up as I needed to top it up, but the plants in there just drew all the nitrates and ammonias and anything like that going out from the fish. It was a very, very low stocking level, of course, but there was just nothing ever went in there. I fed them once or twice a week, and they just sort of lived on any of the microorganisms and the algae and stuff like that were in the tank. Like I said, they spawned on a really regular basis, so that was kind of good. But natural aquarium filtration is definitely one worth playing around with. It's not really the best if you're looking at a display type setup. That doesn't often work, but if you're happy to play around with something in your fish room and stuff like that, it's normally okay. I say it doesn't really work on the display level because people walk in and go, "Oh, your fish tank's dirty," which anyone who has kept fish for a while and has heard that before, because you're doing something different, you go, "It's not dirty, I'm doing blah blah." Anyway, that's a little personal pet peeve of mine. So yeah, they work quite well for fish rooms and experimenting and stuff like that, but it's definitely something that isn't used, that I think could probably be more commonly used in the hobby. Basically, you're loading up with plants. I think an air stone is almost essential for this setup. You've got to still be giving a little bit of vegetation, or alternatively, you could have a power head at one end pushing water around a little bit. You're going to get some algae, but you want still want a little bit of rippling at the top of the system to get that oxygen exchange going on. But like I said, I had an air stone going in there, it was just bubbling enough. Didn't help with the algae because obviously everything was still relatively settled, where the power head at one end would be sort of changing it a little bit. But yeah, that's definitely an option, and it's one that I like to employ. In the long run, I'd quite like to take off the hang-on back filter into my black water tank when all the plants are established and run absolutely nothing on it, and have it completely self-contained like that, and sort of tank that I'm growing in the back here, which is basically growing out a few tetras for breeding and plants, so I'm looking at possibly doing that in the long run as well. So that's kind of the natural aquarium filtration sort of thought. So there's the six filter ideas, 6 different filter setups that you can run on your personal fish tanks. Some pros and some cons on them. Some always going to be better for one application, some going to be for another application. So there's, take everything with a bit of a grain of salt. Do your own research and do your own thoughts on where you want your fish tank to go and stuff like that. But there's definitely some options. I had a friend of mine text me actually earlier today. He's never had fish tanks before, and he said he's talked about it for a little while now. And he said to me, "Cam, I want to get a fish tank, but I don't want one that I have to do too much maintenance to." I suggested to him a 60 litre to 100 litre aquarium, plenty of plants, things like dwarf sage, crypts, Java ferns, blue hygro, that type of stuff. You might have to cut the blue hydro a little bit because that grows quite fast, but it does draw a lot of nitrates. And then a really low stocking level of things like Raspora, Tetra, maybe some Platies, maybe some Corridora, and a Bristol nose or something along those lines. But keeping the stocking level and something that size to sort of around the 15 to 20 fish mark, depending on the fish, of course. So I just like people watching's thoughts and what you would suggest for this guy. It's his first time keeping aquariums. He's really keen to give it a go, but he wants to start slowly and not have to get too ingrained. He's got 3 young children, so I completely understand that. So what would you do? That's kind of what I would do. So let me know what you would do if that's what you were what you're sort of setting up and trying to help somebody. That would be my idea. And so before we go, the YouTube channel that I have been watching a little bit in the last couple of weeks is a guy called Lee Nuttall. He works with a lot of American cichlids. He does some absolutely beautiful biotopes. So if that's something that you're into, I think that is worth watching. He's definitely taken my fancy and my attention over the last couple of weeks, spending a bit of time watching some of the stuff he's got. That's some absolutely phenomenal aquariums in the American cichlid sort of species range. So if they're what you're interested, go check them out, give them a search, Lee Nuttall, and you'll find them. Alright, so that's been about half an hour, so I will call it quits. I hope everyone has a good day, enjoy your weekend, have a good one, happy fish, catch you later.